show. Today is October 9th, 2024. We are about 25% through a waxing crescent moon. Very, very beautiful time of the year for us astronomers. Certainly been very nice, clear skies around here as of late. Quite lucky to have a lot of beautiful clear nights. It seemed like new moon was longer than normal this last go around, because I don't know if it's because the past summer has had so many clouds that every time new moon rolled around, it just seemed like who cares. But this time, I gotta say, it seems like I got quite a few beautiful nights, and it looks like tonight is going to be another. So thank you for joining us this week. We have one thing in particular that we are going to be talking about, and that is the fact that C2023A3 Suchunen Atlas does appear to be on the verge of becoming a great comet. And that means a lot of different things depending on who you ask. But for our intents and purposes, it looks like it might end up being the most photographed comet ever in the history of mankind, because it's going to be in a place in the night sky within the next few days where anybody's going to be able to see it after sundown in the northern hemisphere. All you're going to need is a low western horizon if things continue the way that they look like they are going to. So to catch you up, C2023A3 is a comet that was discovered, hence the name, back in January of 2023. And we have been closely watching it as astronomers because just last month on September 28th, it approached what is called perihelion. And that is the point where the comet is closest to getting to the sun. So for Suchunen Atlas, in its case, that would mean between the orbits of Mercury and Venus. But a lot of people, as they should have been, were quite nervous that it would burn up when it reached perihelion because it was going to be, so close to the sun. And obviously comets, being largely made up of ice and rocks, oftentimes fall apart when they approach and are at perihelion. But that was not the case. It did indeed survive. And if you were lucky enough in early October to witness the early morning ritual of seeing the comet first thing before the sun came up, then that's quite awesome. But the best of the show is yet to come from what it looks like. So one thing I'm going to do this week, guys, I'm going to ask you just a little bit of a favor that I wouldn't normally ask. I want as many people as possible to be able to see and photograph this comet. So if you've ever wanted to share your love of astronomy with a family member or a friend, this would probably be the episode to send them, because we're going to go over the comet, how they can see it, what sort of equipment they will need if they would like to photograph it. And I'm going to be taking it just super simple in terms of avoiding jargon wherever possible. So everybody can get a taste of astronomy for an event that is so special, and just really appreciate that moment if they are able to make some time in their evenings over the coming weeks to go and view this spectacle of the cosmos. So if you've ever wanted to share an episode of the Astrocast, this would be the one. So to catch everybody up, C2023A3 Suchunen Atlas. Let's talk about the name first, because what is in a name after all? There are several different types of prefixes that astronomers use for comets. Predominantly, we see the C as in Charlie and P as in Papa designations before the year in which they were discovered. C, in the case of C 2023, means that it is a non-periodic comet. In other words, it does not come on a regular orbit, or it is more than 200 years when it approaches Earth, for a lack of better words. Whereas the P designation is a periodic comet, meaning that it returns to our regular orbit within a period of less than 200 years. So for our intents and purposes, a C comet is one that you are likely to never see again. And a P comet is one that we may have heard about throughout history and might even witness, several times, such as Halley's Comet coming I think it's every 70 years or so. I actually just checked. It's every 75 to 76 years that Halley's Comet comes. So that would be a good example of a periodic comet, whereas Suchunen Atlas is a non-periodic comet. Now, the next number, which is the 2023, is the year in which the comet was discovered. So obviously it was discovered in 2023. And then we also have that A3 designation that comes after. Now, this part was a little bit confusing to me at first when I started learning how these designations work. But essentially, they use letters that represent either the first half or the second half of the month. So A would represent the first half of January, whereas B would represent the second half of January. And then if you were to go C, that would be the first half of February. And then D would be the second half of February, and so on and so forth until you get all the way up to Y, which covers the second half of December. They do skip I to avoid confusion with the number 1. So I is not a designation that you will see in that particular area of the designation. But that is how they determine it. And then the final number on the end, which is a 3 in this case, means that it was the third comet discovered in the first half of January 2023. The second part of it, if you will, is the actual name Suchunen Atlas. And the naming is usually derived from whoever discovers the comet. So in this case, it was actually the Suchunen team, which is the Purple Mountain Observatory in China, that first discovered the comet. And then shortly thereafter, the Atlas team, which is an asteroid early warning system in Hawaii, was able to confirm the comet. So since they both sort of discovered the comet, Suchunen discovered it first, Atlas then confirmed it. They share the naming designation of that comet, which is a pretty typical thing that we do see in a lot of modern day discoveries with comets. So once again, from the top, C 2023 A3 Suchunen Atlas means it is a non-periodic comet discovered in the first half of January 2023 by the teams of the Suchunen and Atlas observatories. Now, what's interesting is we were actually already able to view this as a naked eye object early in the morning of just a week ago. Actually, I was out on, was it Saturday morning? I said it last week on the podcast. Let me check. So that was actually September 28th whenever I was able to view it early in the morning. Now, you're not going to be able to see it yet. So in other words, well, let me think. If you're listening this today on the 9th, tomorrow morning will be the 10th. Actually, you should be able to start seeing it as of the 10th. So I think the brightest of the comet is going to should occur around the 11th through the 13th. Statistically speaking, I believe it should be on the 12th when it is at its brightest. But that can vary a little bit. There are so many different factors that will go into determining how bright it's ultimately going to get and how long that will last, et cetera, et cetera. But essentially what you need to know for viewing purposes is that what you want to do is you want to find somewhere that is very, very dark. This is important because any outside light or light pollution is going to really, really reduce the beauty of the comet whenever you view it in the night sky. If you have a city that's very close by that is letting off a whole lot of light pollution, that does greatly impact your view of things, and in particular down by the horizon. Because if you were to look at the typical suburban night sky, you will notice if you look in the direction of a city that there is a very bright gray cast that comes up from the horizon. And that is actually the glow of the night sky because of the light pollution, unfortunately. So the darker the area that you can get, and if you can find a spot looking west that doesn't have a major city close by, even better. But find the darkest area that you reasonably can. A great way to do that is by using a tool that tells you how to determine how much light pollution is in any given area. Luckily, there is an excellent tool out there. It is called Light Pollution Map, and you can get to it by going to lightpollutionmap.info. I won't get into all the specifics of everything about the light pollution map, but I will say if you can find an area that's green, that's going to be your best bet. So those purple and red areas, those are the really heavily light polluted ones. And no surprise, those are the ones that are around the major cities that are in the area. But I think most places within the continental US, if you're listening from the US or Europe for that matter, and I would hope most of the Northern Hemisphere, within about an hour's drive, generally speaking, you can get somewhere that is significantly darker than you would have within your actual city limits. So what I like to do is I will go on Light Pollution Map. I will find a area that looks very dark, and then I'll actually go on to Google Maps and turn on the satellite imagery. And then I will look around until I can find an area that looks suitable. And I say find an area that looks suitable because you're going to want a really, really low western horizon. This is crucial because that comet is going to be visible low on the western horizon right after sundown. So as soon as the sun goes down, it's going to be visible. But as the Earth continues to rotate, those stars that are in the west will continue dropping. So as a result of that, our view is going to be, quickly taken away, unfortunately, because night is going to fall and the Earth's going to keep rotating. And as that happens, those heavenly bodies will continue to drop, just like everything else sets in the west. So do our stars. So it's important that we find a really dark location with a low western horizon. So you don't want to, for example, be somewhere where there are a lot of tall trees within the direct vicinity. If you have trees way off in the distance, that's okay. But if you have a whole lot of trees, within 100 yards, then that could be an issue. An easy way to see if you've got a low horizon, if you hold one fingertip at arm's length and hold it out over the night sky, that's about 1 degree. And most areas in the Northern Hemisphere are going to get between about 5 and 9 degrees for this comet's view. So just imagine if you are looking out west and you see trees way off in the distance and you hold your finger kind of sideways, and it's able to actually cover up those trees, then you'll know you're in good shape because you've got another, 4 to 8 degrees above that amount that you'll be able to view the comet. Whereas if those trees were very close to you, you wouldn't be able to see that sky and likely are not going to be able to see the comet. Now, as far as when you can go and view, it's going to be roughly the 10th of October until late October. Now, exactly when it's going to fade from view is really anyone's guess. A lot of people are saying the 24th. I've heard the 30th. I've heard it might still be visible in November, depending on how bright it is. So that's a little less certain. What I can say is that if you see it within that first week between, the 10th and the 17th, you're guaranteed to get a pretty great view of a very, very bright, beautiful comet. And like you say, if you get out somewhere nice and dark that does not have light pollution, you should be able to very, very easily see it with your naked eyes if all goes as planned, as it should. And like I say, I was out on September 28th. I was in an area that was not great, Um, not not terrible as far as light pollution is concerned, but certainly not ideal either. And I was able to make it out with my naked eye on the horizon. I wasn't able to see the tail or anything spectacular like that, but I was able to make out the smudge that was the comet. And then whenever I looked through my binoculars, I was able to see the tail and everything kind of pop out at me. So with that already happening from not great conditions on the 28th, with things, getting brighter as it's going to reappear in our night sky soon, I do fully expect that we'll be able to see this comet very, very easily with the naked eye. So, what else do you want to do besides see it with your eyes? Obviously, the answer is you would probably want to get a photograph of this comet. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can go about it. It really is only limited by what kind of gear you want to use, but I would imagine that most listeners likely have it at the very minimum a smartphone. And luckily, this is going to be one of those objects that is bright enough that you will be able to easily photograph it with your smartphone. And if you dial in the right settings, you might be able to get a pretty spectacular photo. Now, there are a couple of recommendations that I would make. The chief one is going to be you're going to want to make sure that you have a very, very stable surface for taking this photo, because we are going to take what is known as a long exposure. And guys, if you're a longtime listener of the show, again, I apologize if you've heard a lot of this a million times before, but I am going to do my best to make sure that as many people hear this episode as possible, and they might not know these terms. So just bear with me while I explain some of the basics. So long exposure photography is how astronomers are able to capture a lot of the beautiful things that you see in the night sky. And the reason we're able to do this is because if the shutters on our camera stay open for a long period of time, that allows more light to come in and hit that sensor and be recorded. Whenever it's nighttime out, if you leave your camera sensor open for a long time, you are actually able to gather a lot more detail from a very otherwise dark image. So the reason you would want a really steady surface is if you don't have that and you're taking a long exposure, you're going to end up with a blurry photograph. If you've ever tried to take like a night photo of someone or someone in really low light, and they were moving quickly and you noticed the photo was very blurry afterwards, that is exactly what will happen if you try to take a long exposure photo of a comet while, not being on a tripod. So you don't necessarily have to have a tripod. You could certainly, if you could find a way to prop your phone up against something, the hood of your car or your windshield would be okay, as long as you can get the angle just right. If you have a pop socket, even, you might be able to align that just so you can, get it set up that way. But ideally, a tripod would be the best way to go. And if you were using it just for your smartphone, there's lots of cheap adapters that you can get on Amazon for just a couple of bucks, that'll let you clamp in your smartphone, so it'll hold it perfectly level for you. Depending on what type of phone you're using, whether it be an iPhone or an Android, kind of determines what settings you're going to want to play with in your phone. The great thing about Apple is they tend to make things very, very easy and user friendly. So if you have that night mode turned on for your camera, when you put it in a tripod, it will let you expose up to 30 seconds, which is great. And that would actually probably be perfect if the sun is fully down and it's actually dark out and you can still view the comet. That being said, I think a lot of the best photos are going to be kind of at dusk, right after the sun's gone down, but there's still a little bit of light out. I fully expect that comet to really pop in those photos. And when there's that much light out still, even though it doesn't seem like that much, a 30-second exposure would be way too much for that. And I don't expect that your iPhone would even attempt to take a 30-second exposure in those kind of conditions using its light meter. But you wouldn't want to manually set it to that either. So the idea, though, is going to be to open up your camera, and then you're going to want to expose for, however long you need. I would say just after sundown. So we're talking, 5 minutes after the sun is completely under, or even, right when it goes completely under the horizon, then you might do, a 1 second exposure. And then 15 minutes after sundown, whenever it's gotten significantly darker out, then you might go for a 5 to 10 second exposure, depending on the circumstances. So on an Android phone, it's a little bit different in that you can pick the different modes that you would like to use for your camera. I personally have a Samsung phone, as I would imagine probably a lot of people do. And if you open up the camera app and then you get your basic photo, video, more buttons, if you tap on more, you will see an option that says Pro. And if you tap on that, you will see all of the different options that you have available to you for the camera settings. And in this case, the one you want to adjust is the one that says speed. And like I say, I would start at probably maybe even less than 1 second, maybe start at like 1/60th of a second and then move it up from there, depending on what the photo looks like. Now, one thing is you'll want to, experiment a little bit, play around with the settings. You might find that, a really long exposure doesn't look as good as a slightly shorter one. And this is kind of where the magic of photography comes in, is learning how all these different settings work. And I'm not going to bore you with all of the details, ISO and shutter speed and white balance and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but the main thing that you need to know is that the darker it gets, the longer you will want your exposure time to be. And if it's completely dark outside, as in, the sun is down and nothing but moonlight out, then you can probably go anywhere from 5 to 15 seconds and be in a pretty good spot. Now, if you zoom in really far with your phone and try to take a 15-second exposure, you can run into some issues there, because you will have what is called star trailing, because you're taking a really long exposure zoomed in on stars in the comet, and the Earth continues to rotate, and it rotates so fast that those stars don't look like pinpoints anymore. And that can result in a less than stellar photograph, pun intended. So yeah, definitely play around with your camera settings. I would probably, practice a little bit beforehand. Feel free to walk out into your driveway and just practice out on regular stars. You might find that you really enjoy it. Anyway, Android and iPhone, both very capable devices. If you have a DSLR or mirrorless camera, even better. Hopefully you know a little bit more about camera settings. If that is the case, if so, I'm not going to explain all the basics from top to bottom, but needless to say, you would want to go with a very wide aperture so you can let as much light in as possible, as low as an ISO as makes sense. Obviously you might want to crank it up a little bit, 1600, 3200, maybe, depending on the lighting conditions. And then as far as focal length is concerned, I will say I would probably go for something. Personally, I would probably go 70 or higher, just because I was a little disappointed with my super wide field shots on a full frame camera. I have a 24 to 70 millimeter lens, and at 70 millimeters, it was just so wide that the Comet was tiny. Now, I will say, if it had a really spectacular long tail on it, that might completely change my opinion. And that might very well be the case whenever we go to view this comet over the weekend. So we'll have to wait and see how that turns out. I certainly hope it'll be nice. If you have a camera that is a APS-C sensor, which gives you a little bit of a more cropped in view, then you could probably get away with like a 50 millimeter lens. In fact, that might be a really great way to go with a 50. And then obviously if you got like an 85 or even a 135, I got a spectacular photo of it with my 135 millimeter lens, just, a little over a week ago. So highly would recommend that. Like I say, though, the big thing to pay attention to, and this goes for everyone, regardless of what kind of camera you are using, is that it's going to be a pretty short period of time that we're going to be able to view this. So, for example, on the 11th, just after 7 o'clock, it'll be sundown here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And by 7:50, that comet is going to be below the horizon. So it will be a pretty quick event, relatively speaking, because, obviously the darker it gets, the better that comet's going to look. So you'll have a shorter and shorter window to kind of get the best photo, if you will. So definitely play around with your settings, try to get a good idea of, what you can expect with a 1 second or a 3 second or a 5 second exposure on your phone in those types of lighting conditions. So maybe you go out, Thursday night if you want to check it out over the weekend. And, right at sundown, take a few photos and see what type of exposure times get you good results with stuff in the vicinity. And then when you're going out over the weekend, hopefully to photograph the comet, you will already be prepared and know exactly what you need to do with your phone. Because what you don't want to happen is something that happens to too many people. It happened during the great eclipse that we had earlier this year, or was it last year now? Let me see. Yeah, I'm crazy. It was in April 8th, the Great American Solar Eclipse, if you remember. A lot of people, unfortunately, were futzing with gear the whole time, and they missed the opportunity to actually view the eclipse. Now, this is not an event that goes by as quick as an eclipse. There are obviously, multiple nights to view it. It will be up in the night sky for probably 3, maybe 4 weeks. And you'll hopefully have multiple opportunities, but nothing's guaranteed. We can't control the weather. It could be cloudy out. There could be wildfires depending on where you are. Fog. There's all kinds of different conditions that can impact your viewing. So I would also like to impart upon you something that we astronomers always take to heart, and that is when there are good conditions, make sure you take advantage of them, because you are not guaranteed to get great conditions again until you don't know when. I remember going into this past summer, I took a dark sky trip out to an area that me and my friend often go to. Actually, we go once a year for an annual dark sky trip. And I remember when we got back, I was just kind of exhausted and beat, from the long trip and everything. And we had a beautiful night a few nights after I got back, and I just kind of skipped it because I was like, I just got back from my dark sky trip, And lo and behold, it ended up being over 2 months before we got another clear sky. Now, luckily, being that we're getting into October and we are in the northern hemisphere, things are starting to cool off, and generally speaking, there's less clouds as we get into the cooler weather, less pop-up storms and those sorts of things. But nonetheless, there are no guarantees when it comes to astronomy. So if there is a beautiful comet out there that is a once in a decade type event, which this very well may end up being, you definitely want to take advantage of it whenever you can. Couple other items I would recommend bringing. If you have a pair of binoculars, it's incredible to view through binoculars. Whatever you have is great. If you have very nice binoculars, even better. But anything that you have is going to improve your view over just your regular eyes. Even a pair of cheap ones like we often get in corporate handouts and those sorts of things is going to be better than nothing. So definitely consider bringing those. Folding chairs are great anytime that you're going out somewhere in nature and you're going to be relaxing for a little while. And if it's really nice out, guys, why not make an evening of it? And after the comet sets, hang out for a while and watch the stars. This is a really, really nice time of year to do it. The weather is starting to get really nice, and hopefully you're not in the Florida area this week, because I know that there's a lot of people down in the Tampa area. They're going to get rocked by the storm, and I'll be thinking about you and hoping everything goes smoothly out there. We actually are still recovering from our own disaster, as you may know, in Western North Carolina from Hurricane Helene. So certainly hope everything goes smoothly for all of our friends and listeners in Florida. But definitely, if you get a chance to go out, consider making a night of it and doing some stargazing, and you will definitely appreciate it. Especially if you go somewhere dark. This time of year, you still have the Milky Way up. So if you can find, dark skies to visit, you could get a beautiful view of the Milky Way. And if astronomy is not something that you do very often, you might be one of many people I have met in my life since I've discovered astronomy who has never even seen the Milky Way with their own eyes. And I'm telling you, if you haven't, it's a incredible sight. So I would highly recommend checking it out. And you can certainly still do that at this time of year. Within the next month or so, it's going to be pretty much below the horizon. But right now, you can certainly still see it. And it is definitely worth seeing. All right. So that's going to cover it for our C2023 A3 Suchinen Atlas portion of the show. If you are a new listener, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Roo. I am the host of the Astrocast. This is a show I've been doing since January. We have quite a nice little following, and we have a lot of great friends who listen to the show and send in emails and messages. And we have our own Discord community where we like to chat about all things astronomy. So if you're ever curious about anything, please feel free to shoot me an email. That is rooastrocast@gmail.com. And then you can also find us online at patreon.com/the Astrocast if you would like to support the show and also get access to our members only Discord. And I would like to take a moment and actually give a shout out to our newest member of the Discord and Patreon for that matter. And that would be our new member, Skip. Skip, thank you so much for joining. We've greatly appreciated the conversation that you have added in to the group chat. Definitely looking forward to getting to know you more and learn more about what you enjoy in the hobby of astronomy. And that kind of brings me to my second call to action for the evening. Since I asked you guys all to share this episode, this is so funny. Skip actually just sent a message in our Discord that I was just talking about. He was asking for a recommendation on dew heaters. And, I'll go ahead and tell you, Skip, I would recommend going on Amazon and typing in dew heater and then getting the $20 newer ones, the NEEWER. I think they're great. They're USB powered, not the 9-volt power that we typically see with astronomy gear. But I plug mine into a free port on my ASI Air. And then another one goes into the back of my camera on one rig. And then on another rig, I've got a small power strip that basically lives on the tripod, and it has the power plug for the mount. And then it also has extra USB ports on it. And I plug the dew heaters directly in that way. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but dew heaters are one of those things that I would not recommend spending a whole lot of money on. I really don't think it's necessary to spend a lot on dew heaters. They do one job, and that is warm up your lens to keep it from fogging up or building up with, dew, as the name implies. So don't feel like you got to spend a whole lot of money on that. If you want, you could certainly check out High Point Scientific. They're affiliates with the Astrocast, or I should say we are affiliates with them. But that's really one of those items where you should save your money if possible and just get something cheap that works. All right. Anyway, what I was saying, though, sorry, I had to answer that question, was I would like for us to have a bit more of a Q&A session occasionally. Maybe once a month we do a Q's into A's type episode. So if you guys wouldn't mind, feel free to shoot over any questions that you may have. They don't necessarily have to be directly astronomy related. If you just have a general question for me, I'd be happy to take a crack at it. You can send those to rooastrocast@gmail.com. And just so you know, I am actually working on setting up a voicemail where listeners will be able to call in and leave a voicemail for the show that I can then play back on air and have folks, hear your question and then I can answer it for you as best I can. And like I say, if I can't find the answer for you, I will always point you in the right direction. So I don't claim to be an encyclopedic knowledge of astronomy. I'm just a curious person who loves learning. So that's kind of my background. So if I can answer anybody's questions, I would be more than happy to. So if you have those, please send them in, rooastrocast@gmail.com. So over the past weekend, another crazy thing that happened in the astronomy world is we had quite the outbreak of aurora over the northern hemisphere. It wasn't quite May 10th levels, like not KP9 G5 storm level aurora, but it was a strong KP7. And there were actually reports of red aurora being visible as far south as North Carolina, which is my state. So I know Brad Panovich, who is our local meteorologist here, he actually posted photos from several tower cams of red aurora that were visible in North Carolina over the past weekend. I have a friend of mine's brother is in Iceland right now, and he was there for that storm and sent back just some spectacular photos of aurora that he took just with his cell phone, just standing there. So I can't imagine the types of photos that you could get with some really good gear if you were in a situation like that. Kind of kills me, makes me want to make a trip up to Norway or Iceland. It's definitely on my bucket list of things to do. It's just that I'm really scared that, I'll plan all ahead and go and try to go at the best time, which is literally now. If you don't know, we are at what's called solar maximum. So if you've ever wondered why we're having so many seemingly aurora events as of the last year or so, it is because we have reached solar maximum. Now, solar maximum generally occurs every 11 years. And we are kind of right in the middle of it right now. It's kind of notoriously hard to predict when the actual peak will be. Some believe it's going to be closer to 2025 when it actually peaks, but you are kind of right in the middle of a great cycle for aurora activity. So if you've ever thought about making a trip up to those very high latitudes, this would probably be the time to do it. Because chances are better than not that you will see some really spectacular aurora if you do make that trip. But just recently, though, like I say, over the past weekend, a lot of incredible photos I was able to see just looking on social media and whatnot. Back when the May 10th event happened, I was able to get some of my photos shared quite a bit. It's actually my most shared photos that I've ever made are photos of aurora, which doesn't surprise me because they're absolutely beautiful. And who doesn't love seeing the northern lights, right? So anyway, a lot of awesome people shared a lot of awesome photos over the past week that are astronomers. And then a lot of amateurs who are not considered to be astronomers shared photos as well. I joined a lot of those Northern Lights awareness pages, I guess you could call them, on Facebook back when the May 10th thing happened, and I was just trying to get more info. They're a little bit annoying in that, like, you see people posting on there all the time saying, "I don't get it, I'm out here, where's the aurora?" And it's not something that happens every week. That's not how these events occur that come as far south as the continental US, generally speaking. That being said, though, being that we are at solar maximum within this 11-year cycle, it is definitely happening a lot more often than it otherwise would. I certainly hope that we will have another really crazy outburst like we did on May 10th. I'm kind of kicking myself for not looking north more the other night, because he posted those photos on Monday and they were from Sunday night, and I was out imaging on Sunday night. But I was imaging in the southern skies, of course. So, of course, I didn't think to turn north. But honestly, from my highly light polluted front yard, I doubt that I would be able to make out any of the very beautiful red aurora anyway. But perhaps I would have had I gotten out a wide angle lens and taken a few longer exposures. But I always feel like if it's going to be one of the really big storms, I'm probably going to hear about it because I tend to follow quite a few astronomers on various social media sites and what have you. I just, being tuned in and the algorithm knows who I am, that information tends to find its way to me. So I don't think I need to really stay on Northern Lights awareness Facebook pages necessarily. Events like May 10th, they don't happen very often. They're really like a once in a century type event. Then again, as crazy as all these outbreaks have been, and the fact that we have seen multiple, KP7 type storms, it's certainly possible that it could happen again before it's all said and done. In case you were wondering, the KP scale actually refers to the planetary index. It's actually, I can't speak German, but a planetary Kenzifer. Forgive me if I completely botched that, but the translation is roughly planetary index. And we use the name KP1 through KP9 to denote, how strong or weak the conditions are, with, KP 0 through 4 being quiet to slightly mild conditions. And then, 5, 6, and 7 are minor to strong storms. 8's a severe storm, and 9 is what is considered an extreme storm. And that is what occurred back on May 10th of this year, whenever we were able to get reports of aurora as far south as Puerto Rico. So events like that, again, they don't occur too often. But when they do, man, oh man, they are certainly worth getting off your butt and traveling somewhere high up and dark, which is exactly what I did. And if you're a long time viewer of the show, I don't need to tell you about that anymore, or I should say listener of the show. I was actually out imaging on Sunday night, the Heart Nebula. I'm a huge fan of the Heart Nebula. It's probably one of my favorites, especially in the early winter targets. The Heart and Soul Nebula come up together relatively early in the evening. And it's something that I've probably photographed more than most other nebula. And I was looking back through my previous 3 years of finished photos of the Heart Nebula. And it's really incredible to watch your progression as an astrophotographer if you go back and look at your complete photos of the exact same targets year after year. Because every single year you will see how much you are improving. And I don't mean new gear, because I've had the same doublet scope since I got started. I'm getting better and better at capturing and processing data. And it's very, very evident looking through the last 3 years of data that I've collected. So that was really cool. I ended up capturing actually the center of the Heart Nebula. I've always been interested in that region. There's an open star cluster. It's actually called Melote 15. I looked it up. That big star cluster with all the gaseous nebulosity in the center of the Heart Nebula. And it came out really nice. I would say I spent probably about 3 hours total. I set the scope up around 11. And then honestly, I just went to sleep and then woke up around 2 and brought it back in just before meridian. I don't like to leave my scope out past meridian just because I don't trust it through a meridian flip. Maybe when I get my observatory set up, that will be different, obviously, because I'll have full control over cables and all that sort of stuff. But right now I pull my scope in and out of the garage to use it. So if it's going to meridian flip, I want to make sure I'm there. And being that it was 2:00 in the morning and I had to work the next day, I just brought it in and then called it a night. So the end result was beautiful, though. I'm quite happy with it. And like I say, it was really cool looking through all those past images and comparing them with the newer ones. I'll also say that whenever I went to process the photo, I noticed a huge, huge difference in noise levels with and without dark frames, particularly with the 585 MC Pro, which is the camera that I was using on my doublet. It's a doublet with a reducer. So it's got, 3 elements, and it's f5.6, 446 millimeters, if you're curious. And essentially with that 585, I'm able to get a much closer view than I was otherwise able to get with the 294 MC Pro, which is a larger sensor, not a huge sensor, but it's larger than the 585 because the 585 sensor is tiny, hence the very cropped in view. But whatever I noticed was it was just super noisy without the darks. And then I realized I had forgotten to add the darks, reprocessed it with, and night and day difference. So very big difference in that. This is your reminder to use dark frames, even if you have a newer astrophotography camera that doesn't get amp glow. They can still have a big benefit on your end result images. I don't always use calibration frames. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I've used flats with every single image I've taken in the last year. I haven't. But if it's a project that I'm really focusing on and I'm not just kind of goofing around one night while I've got a few extra hours, then I'll generally try to do all of my calibration frames, take my flats, et cetera, et cetera. Another issue that I ran into, unfortunately, was when I went to go turn on station mode for my ASI Air, it no longer worked. So I got a software update on the ASI Air, and that's version 2.2.2. It actually just came out September 26th, and it seems to have completely broken station mode. And I use station mode a lot because I leave my telescope out on my front driveway, and then I will have my tablet in the backside of my house, which is, clear on the other side of the property from where the telescope is. So, they both need to be able to connect to my router, which is in a central area to both of those points. Without station mode, I'm not able to connect to my telescope because it's too far away. So I didn't know at first that station mode was broke because I just seemed to be having weird Wi-Fi issues. The next day I took the ASI Air inside, plugged it in, tried hardlining it to my router, and it still was having issues. I finally ended up resetting the Wi-Fi by holding down the reset button for 5 seconds on the back of the ASI Air. And then it gave me the default Wi-Fi password, which is, I think, on all ASI Airs. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then the default SSID, which is, whatever your ASI Airs model name is, it shows it for the name of the network. And once I connected to that, I realized that I was not able to rename the network. So I couldn't I always change it from the default name and password because I go down to an observatory where a lot of people use ASI Airs. So I want mine to have a unique name and I want it to have a password for obvious security reasons. But I wasn't able to do that from the app. And then whenever I would go to turn station mode on, though I could eventually get it to see my Wi-Fi network in the house when I connected to it and tried to actually click on the connect to the telescope button at the bottom, where it shows you all your gear. It would just spin and spin and spin and never actually connect. So I sat there for, probably 30, 45 minutes messing with it, trying to figure out what on earth was the problem. And I finally said, let me try a different device here. So I went and grabbed my iPad, which is on a slightly older version of the ASI Air software. And sure enough, when I booted it up, it said, do you want to update the software? And I clicked no. And lo and behold, it connected on the very first try. I was able to rename the network to what I wanted it to be. And then I was even able to turn on station mode. So if anyone from ASI happens to be listening, I did go ahead and report that issue, but that's definitely something that they're going to want to fix pretty quickly. Because that can lead to big issues. It's one of the reasons a lot of people love to use Nina because it's open source. It's very user friendly. There are a lot of different ways that you can go about connecting to it. And you're not really locked into one ecosystem. So I will say when things like this happen, it certainly makes me think, maybe I should go back to Nina. But if I do that, I would have to do it with the right computer, I would probably want to do something similar in frame, if you will, to the ASI Air. So I would likely use a Raspberry Pi type device. I actually have 2 Raspberry Pis, so I know that there is some software that you can run on it. Let me think. What is it called? I think it's actually called K-Stars, if I'm remembering correctly. I think that's the one that's the open source planetarium type software that a lot of people run on the Raspberry Pi. But if you know of other software that works well on a Raspberry Pi, or if you run Nina on a Raspberry Pi somehow, please let me know. Feel free to shoot me an email at rooastrocast@gmail.com. That's certainly a project that I would consider trying. I do have some small PCs that are left over from a project from a few years back that would be more than capable of running something like Nina. But even though they are very small PCs, they're certainly a lot larger than something like a Raspberry Pi or an ASI Air, which is based on Raspberry Pi. So I'd like to keep it in that tiny form factor that I can hang right on the telescope if possible. But if that is not possible, I would certainly consider trying another option as well. Then again, hopefully ASI or ZWO rather will just get this issue fixed and I won't have to. All right, so let's talk recommendations for this week. I have got one that's a little bit unique in that I'm going to recommend something to you that isn't actually out yet. But hear me out here. So my wife came to me the other day and told me about this, and within about 2 minutes, I had it added to my cart and I was checked out. So if you're anything like me, you might do the same thing after I tell you about this. Neil deGrasse Tyson is actually going to be releasing his new book later this month. It's called Merlin's Tour of the Universe Revised. And if you go to Barnes & Noble, not a sponsor of the show, I might add, they actually have a deal right now where if you pre-order the book, you can get a signed copy from him. And I think it's no additional charge. It's $29.99 because I just ordered a copy for myself. And just because I'm pre-ordering it, I'm getting a signed copy. So if you would like a signed copy of Neil deGrasse Tyson's new book, you can get one. So that's going to be my recommendation for this week. I have seen him live giving an awesome lecture called Astronomy Bazaar last year here in Charlotte. And I certainly would love to see him live again if he happens to come back to Charlotte. But in the meantime, I think I've read 5 of his books now. He's got quite a few out there. He's a brilliant man. He's witty, always fun to read, fun to listen to if you like audiobooks as well. Certainly worth checking out. But I'm just a sucker for memorabilia. I always have been since I was a kid. Back in the day when eBay was like still a really cool place to shop, back in like the late 90s and early 2000s, I would always look for memorabilia on eBay. And that's kind of where my addiction to it started. So I've got some pretty cool stuff in my collection. Maybe I'll talk about it one day. I do have, if you've ever heard of the Mini Museum, I think I might have mentioned this once a long time ago on the Astrocast whenever we first started. But Mini Museum is a really cool shop online. Also not a sponsor of the show, by the way. And they have a lot of space related artifacts in their collection. And I was given a gift from my wife from Christmas one year. And it's actually a piece of the Lunar Command Module foil from the Apollo 11 mission. So the first mission to land man on the moon. I have a tiny little piece of the foil from the command module, which is super duper awesome. And just something super cool to have in your collection if you're a space nerd like I am. So definitely worth checking out. And then I won't even get started on my Lego space collection because we'd be here for probably at least another hour. But guys, I think that's going to just about do it for us this week. If you shared this episode with a friend or family member, I really appreciate you doing that. trying to get the word out a little bit more about the show so we can bring in some new listeners. If you would like to support the show, you can certainly do that at patreon.com/the Astrocast. We have levels at $1 and $5 per month. So give what you can if you'd like to support the show, and you can become a member of our members only Discord, where we are always talking about something astronomy related or something astronomy adjacent. So again, thank you so much for tuning in this week. My name is Rue. You have been listening to the Astrocast. I hope you're all doing very well. And as always, clear skies.